What if you woke up one day and found that your life no longer belonged to you, and that at night, someone else, stronger and wilder and freer, was acting out every filthy, daring fantasy you had ever suppressed? We tend to assume we are fully in control of ourselves. Fight Club makes the counterargument with brutal clarity. The more diligently you construct the facade of the perfect person, the more ferocious, the thing that will eventually break out of your basement. In the previous video, on Severance, we looked at the strategy of flight, the attempt to wall yourself off from your pain and your shadow side. But Jung warned, a locked shadow does not die. It builds strength. Where Severance showed us characters trying to isolate themselves, Fight Club gives us something far more radical. This is the story of what happens when the suppressed shadow stops merely knocking on the door and decides to take the wheel entirely. Durden did not come from nowhere. He was the inevitable answer to the sterility, the emptiness, and the catalogs the narrator had been using to fill his internal void. In this video, we move from the strategy of isolation to the strategy of merger. We are going to look at how Tyler is born, why his charisma is so infectious, and why complete identification with your shadow is not a path to freedom. It is a direct route to self-destruction. If Severance was about trying not to feel, Fight Club is about trying to become your shadow in order to finally feel alive. Before Tyler, the narrator's life is persona taken to the point of absurdity. He is the model of the correct modern person. Stable job, polite, reliable, fully plugged into the consumer cycle. His identity has dissolved into catalogs. The choice between a coffee table and a set of wine glasses stands in for any search for meaning, and his apartment has become a sterile museum of socially approved success. This is the white life where every edge has been smoothed down and every impulse suppressed. The problem is that there is no room for actual life inside that sterility. The persona has become so dense and airtight that the person himself has disappeared behind it, leaving only a collection of brands and corporate algorithms. This is where the psyche begins sending its first distress signals. The narrator's primary symptom is insomnia, and in the context of Jungian psychology, this is deeply symbolic. He cannot sleep because his shadow will not leave him alone. When we sleep, conscious control loosens and suppressed parts of the personality are given a voice. But the narrator is so afraid of losing control over his polished facade that his consciousness simply refuses to switch off, driving him into an existential dead end. This is the state in which the old self can no longer function within its consumer identity, and the new self has not yet been born. To manage the mounting pressure and finally get some sleep, the narrator instinctively looks for outlets for his emotions. He begins attending support groups for the terminally ill, people who have encountered real, final pain. Only there, sobbing on the chest of Bob, a former bodybuilder who has lost his masculine identity, does he find legitimate permission to feel anything at all, and only then can he sleep. Before this, his only way of managing his anger had been compulsive cleaning, scrubbing his space, trying to literally sweep out the unwanted impulses. But the sterility of his apartment stops saving him. The psychic pressure reaches its peak when these surrogate releases stop working. Durden, who had until this point been flickering at the edge of the narrator's awareness, physically materializes at exactly the right moment, during the narrator's endless work trips. Their meeting on the plane is the point of no return. The shadow is no longer knocking from inside. It seeps into reality and takes on flesh. Tyler is born from the impossibility of holding the dam any longer between the immaculate facade and the chaos locked behind it, becoming the embodied answer to a life that has become physically unlivable. Durden does not simply appear. He emerges as the fundamental compensation for everything the narrator lacks. If the narrator is grayness, uncertainty, and passivity, Tyler is concentrated charisma, primal force, and absolute contempt for social norms. He looks and behaves in ways the narrator would never have permitted himself even in his thoughts. The Jungian shadow finds its ideal vessel here, sexual, aggressive, and frighteningly free. The first act of their physical interaction, Tyler's request to be hit, is the key moment of initiation. The shadow demands a return to embodiment. In the world of sterile offices and furniture catalogs, the narrator's body had been nothing but a coat hanger for his suit, an instrument of consumption. Through the physical pain and blood of the fight, he feels alive for the first time in years. The fight becomes a form of meditation, in which the obsessive internal monologue falls silent, and only the pure present moment remains. It is out of this need to feel through pain that Fight Club is born. It is not simply an underground circle of violence enthusiasts. It is a spontaneous attempt by an entire generation of men to reclaim contact with their suppressed masculinity. Tyler's system offers liberation from the tyranny of persona. Club members shed their social roles, their titles, and their fear of public judgment. In a basement soaked in blood and sweat, they find the authenticity that cannot be purchased at a shopping mall. But this salvation already contains a dangerous trap. Tyler does not offer the narrator merely the chance to acknowledge his dark sides. He offers total surrender to them. He begins dictating a new philosophy of self-destruction, asserting that only in losing everything do we find freedom. For the narrator, whose apartment has by this point already been blown up by his own shadow's hand, this path feels like the only true one. The shadow has transformed from a frightening ghost into a messiah promising deliverance through chaos. With the shift from closed basement brawls to Project Mayhem, what began as the internal conflict of one man escalates into a global threat. The shadow stops being the narrator's personal problem and starts claiming the right to restructure the entire world order. Tyler Durden preaches an ideology in which destruction is the only path to purification. In his logic, everything we have built, cities, financial systems, consumer culture, is simply layer after layer of persona that must be stripped from humanity in order to reach its authentic core. This is where the central trap of complete identification with the shadow is exposed. Tyler convinces the narrator and his followers that self-improvement is for the weak, and that only self-destruction carries any meaning. For the psyche, this is catastrophic. Where the characters in Severance tried to preserve the facade at the cost of inner emptiness, Tyler proposes burning the facade down along with the house. The problem is that the shadow in its raw state is unregulated and therefore inherently destructive. Its nature is pure impulse which, once released, tends to obliterate the very boundaries that allow a personality to exist. Tyler's rebellion is aimed at civilization, but in essence, it is a rebellion against the structure of consciousness itself. The members of Project Mayhem voluntarily surrender their names, their individual opinions, and their human faces, turning themselves into faceless soldiers whose sole function is the unquestioning execution of the leader's will. Here lies a frightening paradox. In promising freedom from corporate slavery, Tyler constructs a system that turns out to be even more totalitarian. The shadow simply mirrors the methods of suppression the narrator was trying to escape. He is once again being told to obey, to stay silent, and to be a cog only instead of filing reports. He is now building bombs. If before he was managed by the social dictate of consumption and the compulsive need to own the things in the catalogs, now he is managed by Tyler's rage. This is no longer the integration of the darker parts of the personality. It is complete capitulation to them. The shadow has left the basement and is dictating the rules to society as a whole, turning a personal psychological wound into an act of mass destruction. And the closer Project Mayhem gets to its final objective, the clearer it becomes that in this new world, there is simply no place reserved for the narrator himself. The film's resolution brings us to a final confrontation in which the narrator finally understands. Tyler is not his best friend or his mentor. He is a tumor that has consumed his personality. The takeover had been so gradual and so quiet that his conscious mind simply failed to register the moments when control was handed over. While the persona was busy maintaining the familiar facade, the shadow had long since been running his life. This is most visible in the relationship with Marla. The narrator's persona had denied its dark side so completely that even during Tyler's intimate moments with Marla, the narrator could be awake, physically present, and yet entirely unconscious of the fact that he had ceased to be the subject of his own actions. This was the highest degree of dissociation. He saw the consequences of Tyler's behavior, but refused until the very end to recognize himself in them. Alongside this, we watch the shadow gradually saturate the persona, changing the narrator's habits and manner. At the film's opening, he is a demonstratively correct, non-smoking office worker. But as Tyler gains power, the narrator doesn't notice himself beginning to smoke. His speech changes. Tyler's intonations and phrases begin slipping through. As the narrator himself observes, "Sometimes Tyler spoke for me." This is not merely a metaphor. It describes a process in which the shadow begins to use the host's voice and body without his conscious authorization. Awareness arrives too late. The mechanisms of destruction are already in motion. The only way to defeat the shadow that has become physical reality is an act of shock self-therapy. The shot the narrator fires at himself in the finale is not a suicide attempt. It is an extreme means of severing the connection with an autonomous alter ego. He has to harm his own flesh in order to destroy a projection that has become more dangerous than death itself. This is the moment of brutal awakening. Complete identification with the shadow turns out to be as catastrophic as its total suppression in Severance, where the characters there sometimes became will-less shadows of themselves, stripped of memory and genuine feeling. Here the narrator comes close to becoming pure embodied chaos. Drawing together both stories, we can see two extremes of the same psychological catastrophe. The characters in Severance tried to save themselves through flight from the shadow, turning themselves into sterile automatons. The narrator in Fight Club made the opposite error. He chose murder. Both paths lead to the same dead end. Denying the shadow drains life of color and meaning. Complete identification with it turns life into rubble. According to Jung, the true aim is neither victory over the shadow nor surrender to it. It is integration. This is a difficult process of acknowledgement. Yes, this rage is in me. This force is in me. This hunger for destruction is in me. But to acknowledge something is not to hand it the controls. Integrating the shadow means learning to use Tyler Durden's energy for the courage to say no at work or to hold your limits, without blowing up residential blocks in the process. Tyler was necessary for the narrator as a medicine. He became a poison because the narrator's conscious self was too weak to enter into a genuine dialogue with the shadow. Instead of becoming whole, the narrator simply traded one mask for another. Fight Club teaches us, the shadow is an excellent servant and a catastrophic master. It provides drive, authenticity, and embodied presence, but it has no moral compass and no sense of proportion. The central lesson here is simple, and it is painful. You cannot throw away your dark side like old furniture. But allowing it to burn down your life is not freedom. It is a new form of madness. The path to genuine maturity lies in the ability to look into your own abyss, to acknowledge its power, while keeping your hand firmly on the controls. The shadow should fuel your ship. But the captain must always be consciousness. Which raises a question. Is the shadow always about destruction, violence, and chaos? Could this hidden force be not an enemy to be subdued, but a source of creation and a unique gift? In the next video, we look at a completely different example, Disney's Frozen. We will see how Elsa's suppressed shadow, the one that was forced for years to conceal, don't feel, transformed from a dangerous curse into a magnificent ice palace and a powerful resource for her identity. If Fight Club is a warning about how the shadow can destroy us, Elsa's story is an instruction in how to channel that energy toward something that builds rather than burns. See you in the next breakdown.